There is a pattern most people never examine in themselves. It is quiet, it is subtle, and it is one of the most significant reasons why many intelligent, capable people remain exactly where they are, year after year, wondering why their life has not moved. The pattern is this: when something goes wrong, the first instinct is not to fix it. The first instinct is to be understood. Think about that for a moment. Not to solve it, not to correct it, not to sit alone and examine what went wrong and why. The first move is to find someone who will listen, someone who will nod, someone who will say, "That's really hard. I'm sorry that happened to you." And in that moment, something in the brain registers relief, a kind of release, as if the understanding itself were the solution. It is not. Sympathy feels like progress. That is what makes it dangerous. It has the emotional texture of forward movement without requiring any actual movement at all. You share the struggle, you receive warmth, and somewhere in the transaction, the urgency to change quietly disappears, the pressure dissolves, and you stay. This is not a criticism of human connection. People need to feel heard. That is real. That is biological. But there is a significant difference between the natural need to feel connected and the habitual use of suffering as a social currency. One is honest. The other is a mechanism. And when a person begins using their pain to generate attention rather than generate change, something important starts to deteriorate inside them. The behaviors are not always obvious. They rarely look like weakness from the outside. Sometimes they look like honesty. Sometimes they look like self-awareness. But if you slow down and examine them carefully, the pattern becomes clear. There is the person who complains consistently, but never corrects anything. They can tell you exactly what is wrong with their job, with their relationships, with their body, with the system, with other people. The analysis is often accurate. The articulation is often sharp, but nothing changes. Because the complaint was never designed to produce a solution. It was designed to produce a response. The response is what they were after. The problem was just the vehicle. There is the person who explains their failures in extraordinary detail. Every time something does not work, they construct a thorough, logical, sometimes entirely accurate account of why it happened. The circumstances, the timing, the people involved, the history behind it. And they share this account with precision, not because the explanation will help, but because a well-explained failure feels less like a failure. It feels more like evidence of a complex life. And somewhere in that explanation, accountability quietly exits the room. There is the person who seeks validation after mistakes. Not accountability, not correction, not honest feedback, validation. They present the mistake in a way that invites the listener to say, "You did the best you could. It wasn't your fault. Anyone would have done the same." And if the listener says something more honest, the conversation shifts. The discomfort grows. And often, a new listener is found, one more willing to offer comfort. There is the person who attributes nearly everything to circumstances, the environment they grew up in, the opportunities they were not given, the people who failed them, the economy, the timing. None of these things are fabricated. Circumstances are real. Disadvantage is real. But there is a difference between acknowledging a difficult starting point and using that starting point as a permanent explanation. One is honest reflection, the other is a permanent residence, and there is the quieter version of all of this, the oversharing. The constant narration of difficulty, not to process, but to be witnessed, to be seen as someone who carries weight. Because if people know how much you carry, perhaps they will ask less of you. Perhaps they will hold you to a lower standard, and a lower standard, in the short term, feels like mercy. What none of these behaviors feel like from the inside is weakness. They feel like coping. They feel like self-expression. They feel like authenticity. But over time, they do something to a person. They do something slow and significant and very difficult to reverse. They teach the mind that the appropriate response to difficulty is an appeal to others. That is not strength, that is dependency wearing the language of sensitivity. And the consequence is not just emotional, it is practical. The person who builds their sense of self on sympathy received will calibrate their standards to what sympathy allows, and sympathy allows a great deal of failure, because sympathy is generous. Sympathy says, given everything you've been through, you're doing remarkably well. And if you hear that often enough, you begin to believe it, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. Even when the results are not there, even when the years are passing and the position has not changed. Sympathy does not have high standards. It cannot. High standards and consistent comfort are incompatible. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths in human psychology. Now, the shift. Because this is not simply a diagnosis. A diagnosis without a direction is just another form of complaint. And the point here is not to make you feel exposed. The point is to offer something more useful than comfort. Strength is built differently. It is built in the absence of an audience. It is built in the private decision to correct rather than explain. It is built in the accumulation of small, invisible disciplines that no one witnesses and therefore no one validates. That is precisely what makes them powerful. When you make a mistake, the first instinct may still be to share it, to contextualize it, to find someone who will receive it with understanding. Acknowledge the instinct. Then set it aside. Sit with the mistake alone. Examine it without softening it. Ask yourself the honest question, what part of this was my responsibility? Not what part was circumstance. Not what part was other people. What part was mine? And then, without announcement, correct it. Now consider the contrast. Consider two men facing the same setback. A professional failure, a rejection, a significant mistake. The first man needs it to be understood. He explains it to people close to him. He revisits the details. He waits for someone to confirm that it was not entirely his fault, that he could not have known, that the circumstances were against him. And when that confirmation comes, he feels better. For a time. But the pattern of the failure has not been examined. The correction has not been made. The skill has not been developed, and when a similar situation arises, which it will, he is no more prepared than he was before. The second man absorbs the setback differently. He may not speak of it at all, or he speaks of it once, briefly, without drama, and then he returns to it privately. He asks himself the difficult questions. He identifies what he did not know and learns it. He identifies what he did wrong and corrects it. He does not wait to feel ready. He does not wait for encouragement. He works quietly, without applause. And the next time a similar situation arises, he handles it differently. Not because circumstances favored him, but because he is no longer the same person who failed the first time. The distance between these two men is not talent. It is not intelligence. It is not even opportunity. It is the decision about where to place their energy when things go wrong. One places it outward toward understanding. The other places it inward toward improvement. And over a decade, the difference between those two directions becomes enormous. This is the truth that sympathy cannot offer you. It cannot tell you this because its function is comfort, not growth. And comfort, taken consistently as the primary response to difficulty, produces a person who is comfortable, not strong, not capable, not respected. Comfortable. Respect is earned differently. Respect follows demonstrated capability. Respect follows reliability. Respect follows the quiet evidence that a person has standards they actually hold themselves to, not standards they announce and then soften when the holding becomes inconvenient. You do not earn respect by explaining how hard things have been. You earn it by continuing to perform despite how hard things are. And self-respect, the respect you hold for yourself, follows the same logic. You cannot maintain genuine self-respect if your behavior consistently falls below your stated values and you consistently explain it away rather than correct it. The mind knows. It always knows. And the internal account of who you are is built from what you do, not from what you say about what you do. This is the quiet crisis that many people carry, but rarely identify. The explanation feels honest. The self-awareness feels real. But the behavior does not change. And over time, the gap between the person they narrate themselves as and the person they actually are becomes a source of low-level, persistent discomfort that sympathy only temporarily relieves. The exit from that pattern is not dramatic. It does not require a breakdown or a revelation or a single defining moment. It requires a decision. A quiet, unremarkable decision to stop explaining and start correcting. To stop distributing your struggles and start solving them. To stop measuring your performance by what you have survived and start measuring it by what you are building. Not all at once. That is not how it works. It is small. It is daily. It is the choice, made again today, to hold yourself to the standard you know you are capable of, without waiting for someone to hold it for you. That is what builds identity. That is what builds resilience. That is what builds the kind of person who can walk into difficulty and remain functional. Not because they feel no fear, but because they have stopped requiring permission to move through it. The world does not need more people who are understood. There is already a great deal of understanding available. What is scarce, what is genuinely valuable, what earns the kind of respect that does not evaporate, is capability, consistency, emotional stability, the private discipline that produces public results, the willingness to hold yourself to a standard in the dark when no one is watching and nothing external is compelling you to. That is what strength actually is. Not the absence of weakness. Not the absence of struggle, but the decision to meet struggle with correction rather than narration. So here is the question this leaves you with. Not as a judgment, as an honest inquiry. When something goes wrong in your life, what is the first thing you reach for? Understanding or improvement? Do you move toward an audience or do you move toward the work? When you examine your last significant failure, did you correct it or did you explain it? And are the standards you hold yourself to today higher than they were a year ago, or have they been softened by the accumulation of reasons why they could not be met? These are uncomfortable questions. They are supposed to be. Comfort has already had its turn. Strength is available. It is always available. But it will not come through the door of reassurance. It comes through the door of responsibility. And that door, you have to open yourself. If you choose strength over sympathy, comment. No excuses.